Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. Been a week since we had the last wee chat. Hope you and yours are well. A lot's happening as always. And the clock is already ticking, so let's get the crew in right away. Save us as much time as we can. So firstly, the Dakota boy is back. North Dakota, our man Phil, is back in town. Mr. Boswell, how are you? Nice to see you as always, my friend.
Aye, good to be back. I was, well, I got pissed, let's be honest, and struggled to get up in the morning
because of the time change. You've just gone and blown your cover.
Can you say it's like life's short, you know? You got to make the most of it.
Yeah, well, I think you want to control yourself with that alcohol.
Control myself?
You wouldn't see me doing that.
No, because I'm usually drunk too.
I know. Oh, and of course, up there in Edinburgh is teetotal, our Mr. Lloyd.
How you doing, Roddy?
Are you teetotal?
Nice to see you back, Phil.
Yes, well, enough of this. How have you been, Lloyd?
I've been great, apart from this is possibly the maddest week in my membership of the Scottish National Party I've ever had, but there we go.
Yeah, it's going to be a heck of a conversation we have. And I'm sure our lawyer in Clackmannanshire has checked all the legal angles and will be able to keep us in the straight and narrow. Eva, my friend, how are you?
Very good, thank you, Roddy. Nice to see the Floyd back on form already. I'm a very special tonight. As you can tell, I've been at the hairdressers, and so I'd like to say hiya to Guy, who did my hair today and who's going to be watching Prism for the first time this weekend. So welcome, Guy.
Some guy cut my hair as well. I don't know who it was. There you go. And there we are, our Miss Shirley Temple down in the Borders. There she is. Oh, there she is. And Bertie, of course, letting us know he's there too. So Bertie and Yvonne, good evening. How are you?
Well, like Lloyd, just, this last week, it's like being caught in an Andy Warhol movie. It's just been off the scale.
Yeah, just when you think it can't get any crazier, it goes and gets crazier, Phil. Now, lots have been happening this week, but it would be just not right if we didn't start at the very top. The man who created the vow for the British Union to save the British Union in 2014. We were horrified when Nicola Sturgeon gave him the job as the communications manager in the SNP. And that's when the real bad attacks happened on the pro-independence media and on the Yes movement. No coincidence. And then he admits that he told a lie, inadvertently, not his fault, and he leaves in, funny circumstances. And then he reappears as the CEO on 95 grand a year. Mr. Continuity, Humza Yusuf, appoints Mr. Continuity, Murray Foote. Were you shocked, stunned? And what do you think? Good or bad appointment, Phil?
Well, it's it depends on your outlook. If you want to maintain the union as it stands, it's a good appointment. If you want to free the people of Scotland, then it's another fight we've got to fight. We've got to remove these people. Murray Foote, author of the vow, and lest we forget, David Cameron, Miliband, Clegg personally pledged a no vote would deliver faster, safer and better change than would independence for the benefit of the people of Scotland. Extensive new powers for the Parliament will be delivered in the process, and a timetable to be agreed and announced by our three parties, they wrote, only for the next morning after the vow for it to be blown out of the water by Evil and Mr. Cameron. So and this is down to him. He was the editor and one of the main drives behind this. Yeah. The parchment style, it was supposed to be it was solemn, you can trust us, it just makes you sick. The vow, remember, it was like close to federalism or home rule. Gordon Brown rolled out that odious man. And a lie, it's a lie. We all know it's a lie, with Cameron confirming as much the very next morning with evil English votes for English laws. And where are we now? Where are we now after these promises and these lies? We're no further forward in delivering anything contained in the vow, which you will note that the Daily Record is disowned and played down. So why do we now have the key architect of this lie, this desperate but impactful scam that was pulled on the people of Scotland, along with you won't get the BBC or your pensions, you can't stand your own 2 feet, and as Eva's often said, you really are too wee, too poor and too stupid. This man is about as passionate about freeing Scotland as that other unionist spy Daniel Defoe was, which is why he now, as CEO of the SNP, and mouthing about independence, gives me the boke. It just gives me the boke. Wake up, people. More of these shysters like David Harvey, the Crown agent who left the Procurator Fiscal's office, now to be a sheriff, worked for MI5, seconded to the Foreign Commonwealth Office in 2001, or seconded to the Foreign Commonwealth Office well, if you know what it means, you know what it means. If you don't, you don't. So back to SNP, Mr. Foote. As ever, friends, watch for actions, not words. Murray Foote, I believe you're telling lies if you say that you want independence for the people of Scotland. You're nothing like the champion the people of Scotland need right now. Desperately need right now, and you've already proven that you cannot be trusted. So Humza and all the other shysters that are in on this, to hell with you. What this says to anyone paying attention, sadly, is don't vote SNP right now if you want an independent Scotland.
Absolutely. I mean, here's the thing, Lloyd. If you and I had been having a beer after the election in 2014, the referendum rather, and I'd said, I've had a vision, Lloyd. And, 9 years from now, that guy has just written the vow, Murray Foote, he'll be the CEO of Scotland. You'd have probably phoned a taxi for me and sent me home from the pub, you know?
I'd have called for medical attention, Roddy.
Mm-hmm.
But this is how far we have fallen. I mean, I find it quite extraordinary. But by the same token, I can see there's an element of logic in this. Murray Foote was around and in charge of communication during the period of the great fit-up under the despot Miss Sturgeon. He knows where the bodies are buried. He knows a lot of the players in this scandal that will be written about in books many, many years to come. They need him there. They need him there because he's got knowledge that if he's on the outside is potentially dangerous. So it's a classic example of better having him in the tent than on the outside of it. But what does it say to the membership? It says that the CEO works for the National Executive Committee and works for the Cabinet and works for the leader, when in reality, the Chief Executive Officer of the Scottish National Party historically has worked for the membership, the party, not for the government, not for the purely elected members. Now, it's another example of the lost history of the party. Under no circumstances, when you have out there, Kevin Pringle should have been in the frame for this job. I don't think the ex-Labour Party card-carrying editor-in-chief of the Daily Mail, of the Sunday Mail Daily Record, really is the perfect choice to lead us to independence. And I'm making light of it. In actual fact, I'm utterly and completely disgusted, because this is another statement of their failure to understand that every day that we don't put a plan for independence in place, we are denying the people of this country their legitimate rights, the future, a legitimate future with all opportunity that can only come with independence is again being put back in the back burner.
Eva, some things I just don't get shocked anymore. I just don't, with some of the things that are going on. But is this a bridge too far at last for too many of the SNP? Will they just be accepting of this? Or do you think this will open up eyes?
Right. Sometimes it can be really easy when you're caught in the midst of a sort of a hurricane or a tornado of events that are involving political matters very dear to your heart, and when you feel that it's just one thing after another and you just can't believe what's going on, you can get carried away with it. And people exaggerate, and there's hyperbole, and there's wild claims and accusations, rather than simply empirical evidence. And the evidence, controvertible, is that Murray Foote was the head of communications and strategy, I think it was, or media, for the SNP from February 2020. That is a really important starting point. February 2020, in the weeks leading up to the first lockdown and in the period leading up to Alex Salmond's trial. And he continued to represent the SNP in terms of their public-facing communications and media strategy over the course of the best part. Somebody needs to be muted because they've got music on. And what Murray Foote presided over were communication strategies involving the then First Minister being repeatedly interviewed in the media and giving evidence on oath at the Holyrood inquiry, and being subject to an investigation in respect of whether or not she had broken ministerial code. Murray Foote's position there was pivotal for the SNP. Its importance and its significance cannot be overstated. He doesn't just know where the metaphorical bodies are buried. For all we know, he helped to bury the bodies, and he's in the job he's in now so that he can continue to keep them well hidden. Now, this is not speculation in the largest of parts. These are facts. There was a job description which was substantial. He was a man who was relied upon to a great extent by the very pinnacle of the leadership of the SNP and by individuals who have now fallen from grace at a speed of knots. So he's not in that job now because he's the best person to deliver the freedom and liberty of the country. He's not there because his raison d'etre is the liberation of Scotland. He's there to protect and safeguard the interests of the SNP as far as that's possible, as they, as a party, continue to fall in public and unfortunately also international estimation. So it would be really interesting to prepare a detailed timeline of significant events or non-events in the Scottish independence calendar between February 2020, when Murray Foote was first appointed by the SNP, and now, because I suspect we'll see a correlation, a very clear correlation between the darkest of days for the movement and his appointment is not good news for the country, and it's probably far too late to save the party if the news that came out the day after his appointment is but the tip of the iceberg. And in that regard, Murray Foote is, to an extent, a squirrel designed to take our attention away from the content of the accounts, the incompetence of the current SNP government, and their utter disregard for the benefits of the people of Scotland, for the welfare of the people of Scotland, and the pure hash that they're making of the Rutherglen Hamilton West by-election, which should never have happened. So there's far, far more to this job, this appointment, than meets the eye, as usual.
It is quite disgraceful. I mean, another thing that maybe not a lot of people are aware of, are the SNP gaslighting us, Yvonne, because this announcement was made on the same day as the anniversary of the murder of William Wallace down in London at the Smithfield Market. The same day as the commemoration of William Wallace, the SNP bring out the man who had more to do with this losing the referendum than anything. Is it gaslighting, or are they just so stupid they didn't realise it was the same day?
I don't think they've got any regard or respect for Scottish history. It won't have occurred to them. But, you know, it's like a revolving door, Jackson's entry, isn't it? It's you can't reheat toast, you can't rescue a souffle, and you can't rehire Murray Foote. You know, it's as simple as that. And I don't think he'll last there very long. I don't think the membership were really consulted. They've made a few high-handed decisions, and we have to blame the continuity candidate for that. And it's quite clear that they're back on the road again in, well, not in a camper van, but they're back on the road again and chuntling along and just oblivious to the harm and the damage that they've caused. I mean, it's grist to the mill as far as the independence movement is concerned. This is good news for the other independence parties. And my prediction is in a couple of years' time, when you're putting your kids to bed, they'll be saying, so tell me, what was the SNP? Tell me about what it was. It'll be gone. They can't survive financially. They can't survive rehiring these spin doctors on eye-watering amounts of money. I knew Murray Foote when he was a night editor at the Daily Mirror in London on probably 45 grand a year. He must be on his knees thanking God or whoever it is that he worships to for the money that he's on now. Incredible.
Yeah, I think being on your knees in the SNP gets you promotion. Phil, it's just not our Barbie, it can be bad. Phil, I know you're always saying, it can be, we can turn it around, it can be turned around. Do you not think we've maybe gone a bridge too far? Is it, you still think the SNP can be saved from this?
The longer this goes on, the deeper the hole, the blacker the mark, the longer the memory. And it can always be recovered. You can recover. Look at the toing and froing of political parties over time. It's when you change the system that you can lose parties. Like we're switching to the American system, so the Liberal Democrats will disappear. But for SNP, I would say most people don't engage in politics to the extent that we do. And as I keep saying, it's the management of perception generally. And people are busy enough in their own lives, God forbid, you know, your family, your work, maybe get a wee bit of spare time, maybe do something, your social time. You're not going to study the economics of a country or BRICS or Kevin McKenna's articles or look into JERS, the system. You're not going to do that in your spare time. You're going to chill out and have a beer, you know. So I'm not blaming people at all, but I think what's becoming, what has to be managed here by those of us that want independence, we need to use whichever vehicle is appropriate and best, and for a substantial part of the population, even in spite of what I would say were patently obvious to those of us watching incidents and evidence that the SNP has been not only infiltrated but completely derailed. It is no longer on the track towards an independent Scotland. There are still large numbers of people who associate the Scottish National Party, and we thought the name was too aggressive at the time. We thought about changing it many times because of the association with nationalism, that odious general consensus. Well, what most nationalist parties do is not good. So it's an unfortunate name, but we follow it in the true sense of the word. There's enough people who associate SNP with independence, and probably always will. And for that reason alone, I think it will come back. It will play a part. There may be another leader in the future who could. There are plenty of leaders who could recover it, but I think another party may take the lead here. It's an opportunity for Alba, certainly, and this is where I think we should consolidate. I think one of the problems was having SNP as the only or primary, well, let's face it, only vehicle for independence as a political party in Scotland made it an easy target, a real easy target, and the obvious target if you want to, if Perfidious Albion wants to work its magic. It's not magic, it's just corruption, blackmail, playing egos, and understanding how politics work and how people work and how perceptions can be managed. So it will recover, it will play a part in Scottish independence, and I hope it does, because we all have a love for what we stood for, and the people that have went before us, and the people that have been cheated and betrayed. So I hope it will come. I hope it's not that, and it will come back. Whether it leads the independence movement, I think probably the best policy would be to go with something like we did with the Yes movement, or under one banner, or Scotland, united. But certainly Alba could at some point overtake the way this decline is ongoing, and the depth at which these savage cuts by the Unionists into the heart and body of the SNP have been made. They will take a long, long time to heal, and the betrayal that's come out of that once magnificent party, I will never forget.
You're quite right. Phil mentioned there Kevin McKenna's article. Can you put, Techie, can you put up that headline from Kevin McKenna's article, Lloyd? I don't know if you get a chance to read it. He was saying that the SNP have to lose, and lose big, for the good of the movement. Do you go along with, did you read Kevin's article?
Oh, yeah.
Did you go along with it? Did you go along with it, or do you think he's been a bit too severe?
I still find myself torn, Roddy. I think his analysis is absolutely bang on. As someone who stands on the outside, who only really came positively to independence within the last decade. Consequently, Kevin, because he's a smart guy, has done his homework, and he sees what a lot of other people don't see. I think he's telling us what's going to happen. The SNP are going to get very badly hurt at the coming British general election. And part of the reason for that, in real terms, is they failed to understand why, in 2015, they took all but 3 of the seats in Scotland. That was on the back of the spur that came from the independence movement and the run-up to the referendum. They haven't analysed that properly. As a consequence, the numbers have gone down and down and down, and they're going to go further down at the next general election. Can I see anything in Kevin McKenna's article that the SNP themselves might take on board? Unfortunately, no. In reality, this should be number 1 on the agenda at the group meeting, both in Westminster and at the Scottish Parliament, the first time they all get back together again, and how to redress what Kevin is talking about, how they get themselves back onto a path. But in reality, as Phil alluded to as well, the only way forward now is a Scotland United approach. But the difficulty is, how do you get self-centred, venal, not very clever people in a room with clever people and get them to agree on anything? Because and I speak here as a member of the Scottish National Party, I have never, in all my years in the party, I have never known us to have such a low level of debate. The debate, in fact, it's not even debate. There are statements made and then people nod. There are statements made and then other people nod. The reality is that the party has lost its soul. But the membership, there is a core membership that hasn't shifted over yet that can still make a change. But in the end, a bloody nose is what they need. And it's not the Scottish National Party. It's the people who are currently elected members, particularly of the Westminster Parliament. It's them that need the bloody nose, because they're the ones who have been entirely inactive in progressing the nation's future for the past 9 years. It's straightforward. They've got to go.
Eva, do you, you're SNP for a long time as well. And I should say here now, none of us are enjoying this at all. It hurts to see the party that we gave so much time and devotion to in the state it's in. I can't see it being savable. Do you?
Look, this is about Scottish independence. It's about freeing our country so that we are living in a normal, independent state, and we can make the decisions that are for the best for the people who choose to live in Scotland. It's not about individual parties. It's not about individual people as such. It's about a collective movement. And Better Together did exactly what we would have expected them to do in 2014. Labour and Tory and Liberal Democrat allied with each other to see off the independence movement. That's what happened. If the independence movement is going to win this time, it will win at another electoral event, which will have to be a referendum or, more likely, an election of some description. Doesn't matter hugely at the moment whether we're talking about Westminster or Holyrood. There has to be a mass vote in favour of independence. It is not likely that this will happen if people are urged to vote only for the SNP because they happen to be the biggest party. That will not work. They cannot get a majority of the popular vote. They might get a majority of the seats at Westminster, but that looks increasingly unlikely. So what the SNP require to bring them to the table where we talk about what's best for Scotland is either the carrot or the stick. They have been offered the carrot over and over again in the context of Scotland United, and a constitutional convention has been mooted repeatedly, and they have ignored that time after time. They have thrown slurs at others within the movement and have made accusations against us that have not been well founded, because they want to direct their ire and their fire outwards instead of inwards, because they appear at the moment, in terms of leadership, to be wholly incapable of looking within themselves and finding the courage and the strategy and the ability and the fire that Scotland needs today. So if the carrot does not work, then the stick will have to be used. And the stick will be that people from all other independence parties and independent-minded candidates of no party will challenge the SNP at subsequent elections, and Scotland may lose because Unionists may win these seats. And that will be down to the fault of the SNP. In terms of the Rutland by-election, for example, Rutland and Hamilton West, everybody knew before anybody declared that the Scotland United proposal was the ALBA proposal. That didn't mean that it had to be an ALBA candidate, but the Scotland United proposal was the right one to deliver the right message to Westminster, to the people of Scotland and on the international stage. But rather than debate a sensible pro-Scotland policy and a pro-Scotland stance, the SNP chose to announce their candidate, who has very, very, very rarely uttered the I word throughout the campaign thus far, as I can see. There has been talk about standing up for Scotland. There's been some emphasis on the Scottish Child Payment, which has nothing to do with Westminster. It's a creation of Holyrood, and there's been very little else. Labour obviously declared, and we've had the ISP and the Greens say that they're now standing too, and their candidates have both been identified. I understand that candidates from other independent supporting parties, and every single one has turned a deaf ear to the notion of Scotland United. So if Scotland is going to be united, and if there's going to be an independence vote, that kind of behaviour will not cut it, because the Better Together people and all the unionist parties, Rishi Sunak and all those around him, will sit and do exactly what Edward, the Hammer of the Scots, did to Wallace and Bruce and all the rest of us hundreds of years ago, and laugh and say the problem with the Scots is they keep falling out with each other and they can't get their act together. That's where we are today, and the blame for that lies at Hamza Yousaf's door. And when the people of Scotland see that, see it lost to union, it's the SNP who will suffer, and their party will suffer the ire of the Scottish independence movement for years to come, and they will deserve to suffer that.
Indeed, I agree with you. Yvonne, do you agree with Kevin or not? Do you think that it's going to take a good good beating for the SNP to come to their senses, or are they beyond it?
I think the SNP is in terminal decline, and the trouble with Scottish people is you're far too sentimental. You know, I remember my first ever car. It was a Morris 1000. We probably all remember our first ever car, but there comes a time where you've just got to let it go, either to the scrapyard, as my Morris 1000 went, or to somebody else. It's no longer viable. It's toxic. It's in terminal decline, and it's really sad. But, you know, just we have to focus on independence. That's the prize, and move on. It's obvious to everyone that dark forces have riddled the SNP. They've infected every area of the SNP. And this revolving doors and people being sacked and then rehired, it's classic dark forces. Let the party go. Just let it go and, you know, forget the sentiment. Our emotions should be tied to independence, not to the party. And I think that is happening now, and people are beginning to realise that and focus on the prize. And the prize has nothing to do with the party. And that party was a great party. When I came up to Scotland, it had all sorts of progressive policies. Who brought them in? Who drove them in? Alex Salmond. You know, what has, and don't dare mention the BB, but what has Nicola Sturgeon brought in to the SNP since she became First Minister?
The Alba Party.
Well, yeah, you know, I mean, it is ironic, but yeah, Nicola Sturgeon, that's probably, the Alba Party is probably her greatest achievement.
Yep.
She'll have a whole chapter on that in her biography.
I'm sure she won't, but there you go. Phil, the other thing is, this week was when the Electoral Commission announced all the accounts were in from all the different political parties. Now, the SNP, well, now you're a financial expert on here. Two things that, you know, and I want to firstly pay homage as usual to our Stu Campbell, who's been doing some good stuff on these accounts. Two things that came to me, and I need some help here, was one, it's normal that when there's no general election year, and last year there was no general election year, it's like you know, you're refilling the bank again because you're not got the same expenditure. And yet, without a huge general election last year, the SNP managed to run up an 800,000 deficit, which is more than they normally do. Which is one strange, maybe you can explain that one to me, but the other one was, as part of their income, Phil, I noticed they generated over £500,000 from conference revenue. Now, the only conference I know they had in the last 12 months was one with 534 delegates. Mm-hmm. Now, unless they all chipped in £1,000 each, where did this £500,000 come from?
Yeah, there's a bit of continuity here with what Kevin McKenna's article was pointing out. You know, when he pointed out the problems within, and that final quote he gave, they have betrayed the honesty and hard work of thousands of their most committed and authentic supporters and activists. Only by losing big can independence in the long term be rescued from these deceivers. And this is what this is. This is deceit. And critically tying in with it all that we're talking about today, the SNP do not have the funds to finance a great campaign. And not only that, going back to that, they're run by people who don't want Scottish independence. They're the people who are managing Scotland are being controlled by people who don't want Scottish independence. So the gravy train sookers will follow orders, and those orders will be continue to sabotage any progress or case for Indy. And this is a case, the ultimate case in point, destruction from within. Clearly, there are serious problems. I mean, we've talked about this many times. We've been waiting on this coming out, and Wings again excelled, as he always does, the Reverend. His article, read it please people if you haven't already. Don't you wonder sometimes, dated just August 24th. The first one that stands out was 340,000 in 2022 for audio visual, which is about £425 a head for attendees. Then the parliamentary levy shows splits in dissent. We paid the parliamentary levy, but we weren't happy about it for different reasons, because some people got the attention of the press and the SNP, i.e. those who were close to Nicola and followed Nicola's orders, and any dissenting voices. We didn't get any bang for our buck. It was supposed to be paid in to a general pool where we could bring support and generally get our message for independence over. That's not what it was spent on, and that's what we objected to. And I could name people, I won't, I'll let them say it, but I was one of them who hung on quite a while before eventually succumbed to the greater good.
I'm saying your good pal Angus Brendan, that he withdrew paying that levy because he wasn't getting any press coverage, and he wasn't getting any television gigs, and he wasn't getting any, he wasn't getting a bang for his buck, so he said, well, you're not getting it then.
Well, you may say that. I couldn't possibly comment, but the classic is the numbers show, and Stuart Campbell's analysis is correct, there are a number who've refused to pay it for that reason. And then you go on to the 470,000 for IT when you have about 25 employees. It's in 2022, and 30
grand per employee.
Yeah. And we'd already spent 285,000 on it 2 years ago on the same thing.
Okay.
Really?
Yeah.
So, and then there's the memberships and money, which is a saga all to itself.
Yeah, I mean, I work for one of the largest tech companies in the world in a very senior director's role. We didn't spend 30 grand a year on our people, and they were a tech company. I mean, just nowhere near that.
No, and the great thing about the Reverend, he ends with the prospect of a UK election looming, and which should not be lost on any of us. And the SNP have no money to fight it. That's what beat us in 2017. A very poor election campaign because we were already infiltrated. We didn't know it then, but we were. And if you could call it an election campaign in 2017, was the main reason the SNP, we lost so many of the 56 in 2017. You need cash and smart, good strategy to win elections, a message or something that resonates. And for that you need intelligence, strategic new understanding, political understanding, how the games are played, and this is some things that are in short shrift within the SNP right now.
Lloyd, when you looked at these accounts and saw them, I mean, didn't you think something just doesn't feel right about this?
The whole thing makes no sense to me whatsoever. I mean, the amount, the audiovisual spend at the conference, you could set up a tech company for that. You could set up an AV company for that. It astounds me. I mean, and also I don't, what exactly, if they bought equipment, then where in the accounts is the equipment? Where does it tell us where what it's worth? Yeah. I mean, I think this links into Murray Foote getting the job. It was good to declare it the day before, kept the eyes off the accounts, but also the fact that he's back there. These accounts cover the period when he was there. Is it going to be his job to massage over these figures? Not to mention the fact that these accounts are the background to the police investigation, and the fact that there are, even to those of us who are not, forensic accountants, you can look at it and think, well, this is all a bit strange. How does the membership income go up when your membership has gone down. That was another one that struck me as being quite bizarre, because most of the people I know who, you know, are still clinging on by their fingertips have all cut their membership contribution. The vast majority of people I know have gone down to the minimum, and many of them were people who paid way beyond, you know, who were paying 10, 15, 20, 30 pounds a month, and have gone right down to the £3 a month. So where this money's coming from, I've absolutely no idea. But I think the key thing is what Phil said. There's a general election, a British general election is coming next year, come hell or high water. They don't have the money to fight it. If they fight Rutherglen and Hamilton West as the way that we would do in the past, then that's going to run them up a huge bill as well, which just adds to what they've, you know, to the deficit they already have. But what's horrifying about it is, at the same time as having a huge financial deficit, you also have an activist deficit. You know, for a lot of people in the SNP, when Humza made his announcement of being the first activist, and this was going to be the summer of independence, people started rubbing their hands and going, right, let's get out there and do stuff. And here we are, near the end of August, and as yet, absolutely nothing has happened. Now, you cannot win elections without activists. There is a cadre in the SNP who believe it can all be done on social media. They all think that the world happens on the World Wide Web, and the fact of the matter, it isn't. One of the few things that are left in society, like going to the football, going to the rugby, and going to the polling booth, and going to the door and asking people how they're planning on voting, these are things that are essential to maintain the cohesion of our society. You cannot have politics electronically alone. If you do, you're talking to yourselves. And I can't see the SNP putting huge amounts of activists on the street in Rutherglen and Hamilton West, because there's not the motivation. But the motivation could have been there if Happy Humza had carried on with being first activist and taken us through this summer of love and independence. That hasn't happened.
Eva, did you look at these accounts and think, I mean, for example, you run your own business. Have you ever spent 30 grand on IT for in your life? And your total, never mind 1 year?
Aye, as a percentage of my income, I don't think so. I suppose that was probably the most stark aspect of this for me was the statement from the auditors, to the effect that, in essence, there wasn't a complete paper trail from their perspective, and there were items of expenditure that they appear not to have seen, again, empirical and basic evidence for. So one would have to speculate as to the accuracy of some of the entries in the accounts, because they just literally do add up in the context of dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and the columns all come to the numbers that they should come to. But how much of that is fantasy, we really can't tell. We've already pointed out a number of obvious discrepancies where expenditure on individual items seems to be grossly exaggerated and inflated. But that's what you do when your accounting is creative. I'll tell you what lawyers do, and this is a secret. What lawyers do, if they're skint, is that they overinflate the value of the work in progress in their accounts, so that it looks like they've got files in the cabinet that have not yet been billed and paid for that are going to get them 100 grand, and they look like they're 100 grand in the black. But when work is billed and paid for, it might come to 5 grand, in which event they're 95,000 in the red. I would slightly suggest that something similar might have gone on here. Or what you do is your assets might include the notorious motor vehicles, and you depreciate them over the years to try to make things look a bit more real. You know, there are innumerable accountancy tricks when you're trying to hide something and make things look better than they really are. You're far better just to tell the truth. Tell the truth, shame the devil, don't lead yourself or your supporters or your clients up the garden path. If I'm skint, I want to know I'm skint. I don't want to pretend that I've got a whole load of work sitting in the filing cabinet that's going to be a bonanza next week, if the reality is that I'm on my uppers and I'm going to have to work some ghosters to earn some money. that is just the hard fact of life. If you're not bringing the money in, you can't spend it. If you've been spending it willy-nilly, you're going to have to replace it with real money, not creative accounting. So there's a long, long way to go before this mess is sorted out. Bottom line, you ain't seen nothing yet.
No, Yvonne, SNP were not the only people putting out their accounts. The Labour Party did as well. And the Labour Party in Scotland, it shows, which is the British Labour Party, only exists because, unlike Scotland, which they try and say we only survive because of England's largesse, the Labour Party in Scotland only survives because of the largesse of the Labour Party in London. They're not a real party, they're a subsidised branch office. And while everyone's looking at the SNP accounts, people should be looking at Labour as well. I mean, that's another, it's like if this was happening in a business concept, they'd be getting arrested for being operating bankrupt.
Well, that's why they're called the branch office, isn't it? You know, it's that you look at some of Labour's donors today and they differ very little to the Tory donors. As you know, the Labour Party is morphing more and more into the Tory party and vice versa. It's, well, it is what it is. Labour's not inspiring at all. They will get in the next general election, that's for sure. But I don't think they'll have the landslide that they expect. And they might be in a position where they're scrambling around to form a coalition. It's going to be very interesting times. Starmer has been absolutely brutal with the left of the party, with anyone who doesn't support Israel, and he's booted them out. But it's cost him dearly, as we can see in East London. And we'll probably see in North Tyneside as well, where he got rid of the Corbyn supporting mayor. I would just like to see Jeremy Corbyn stand as London mayor, because I think he would walk it, because he has huge support from the young voters.
Yeah, I just while you're here, and I'll put up, I know Jeremy Corbyn's a personal friend of yours and someone you hold in high regard. Someone I don't, as you know. But Techie, could you put up that where our Jeremy's had a wee bit of a road to Damascus? He must have been sharing a bus or something with Pete Bishop. He now believes that there should be a second independence referendum. Like so many British unionists, Yvonne, he waits till he retires or moves from the top job before he comes out and says what he actually thinks, which is democratic to allow the Scottish people to have a say in their own governance. Yet when he was in power, it was the one thing that put me off him, because he believed in a free Palestine, he believed in a free Kashmir, he believed in all these great things that we all believe in. He's anti-war. Everything about him, ticks boxes for me. But the one thing wasn't. When he was the leader of the Labour Party, no, he wasn't. He was, first and foremost, I'm a British unionist before I'm a socialist or a Democrat or anything else. It's nice to see, but it's kind of hypocritical, is it not?
Well, it is. I mean, I think it was drummed into Labour that you cannot win without getting Scotland back on board. And of course, they can't get Scotland back on board if Scotland's independent. So he's probably been a little bit mischievous at the moment.
Dishonest is the word. Dishonest is the word, Yvonne, not mischievous.
Well, okay. But maybe he's taken notice of some of our email exchanges. Who knows?
We were trying to get him on this show.
I know. Well, still hopeful. But anyway, I wouldn't dwell too much on what Corbyn said, but it is interesting, and I will be in touch with him to find out what was the trigger and what changed his mind.
Maybe he watches Prism.
Quite possibly. Prism has a global audience.
We do indeed. And a few that are from other planets as well. And if you just want to read some of the comments we get on a Sunday. The other one is, and I'm going to come onto the Miss Letby situation later, Phil. The lady who is the serial baby killer, the mass murderer, horrific. But this today, and I'm not going to put up a quote, but Jackie Bailey used it as an example, saying it was similar to the SNP, how they behave over the Southern General Hospital, I won't give it its other name, in Govan, by worrying about the good reputation. But the fact that a Labour politician brings out the UK's biggest serial killer of babies to score a political point shows you just how low these unionists can go.
Yeah, it's all advised. It's what clicks normally, but they do make mistakes, and I think that's a mistake. It's an appalling thing to do. All decent human beings would feel the same way. I think Jackie, for all, she was given some very big targets to hit during the Alex Salmond case, etc., and a few other. They cut the alleged theft of the 600,000 or misappropriation of funds, and she managed to hit a few of them, which is to her credit. But she's not normally that good at hitting targets, especially moving ones. But I just think this ties back to she's just doing what she's told, and talking about Corbyn and what Angela Rayner of Labour said, with no Labour government will ever devolve employment law or agree a referendum. It's the key here is to look at who's talking, then ask yourself, does Jackie Bailey or Angela Rayner or Corbyn, or those who head the once great Labour Party of the UK, who do they speak for? Who actually heads it up? And the answer is clear. It's the Blairite, Sir Keir Starmer and his ilk of the right that represent Labour as we move closer to a two cheeks of the same arse American political system, where you can barely slide a credit card between the two political parties and their policies. I think a most appropriate analogy to use the credit card to slide in between it. But Jeremy, a thoroughly decent man, and I've the benefit and the pleasure to meet and speak to the gentleman. I agree with you, Roddy. But he was in that place where he had to make a compromise. You can't have it all your own way. You have to compromise with party policy, and I believe that's what he's did here. Just as we went along, you went along with my vote to come into NATO as SNP. It's democracy. Sometimes you just go along with it. But Jeremy came out and said he hopes it happens soon and Labour should support it. For me, though, no. Forget it. We, the people of Scotland, should control how we decide on independence, because for me it could still be a trap, and we should set the rules, not perfidious Albion. So no to inclusion or further devolution, which is an option they're clearly warming up for, and the SNP insiders are now feeding us that line, and we should we would be given this has been proven to be a lie. That we would get devolution has been proven to be a lie, and it does not work. And if you're foolish enough to go along with it, it's at best getting an upgrade to a better cabin on the Titanic. Good luck with that, suckers, if you fall for it, because the Union is a sinking ship. And if you're foolish enough to believe that getting a slightly better deal is going to save you, and critically, the people that you're elected to represent or you purport to care about, then hell mend you for falling for that trick.
Phil's absolutely right, Lloyd, that you couldn't get a credit card between the two big parties. I mean, really, you wouldn't. I mean, sometimes if you're watching someone in an interview, in the television, get an interview, and you go, man, I don't know if he's Labour or Tory, unless he comes up and tells you at the bottom, you can't tell the difference. And we got rid of the Labour Party because they had you know, they let us down so often. And yet it's looking very much like the people of Rutherglen, Hamilton West are going to forget the past and elect another one. It's quite bizarre.
What choice have people got, Roddy? You know, I mean, in real terms, what choice have the people of Rutherglen and Hamilton West got? They're angry with the SNP, that is clear. The alternative is to vote for the Labour Party. I mean, I think Labour will win it, but I think it will be a very, very, very low turnout because people don't like getting elections thrust upon them. And I think there'll be an element of a plague on both your houses. But the broader issue here in real terms is you have to offer people something and then you have to deliver on it. And the problem for the SNP is they've not delivered. They've made lots of noises, they've made lots of promises, but they've not delivered. And then for them to be seen to take part in the destruction of one of their own, I think it just damages them even further. But people in this country do have a long memory. I don't think there's going to be a massive, massive return to Labour at the next general election. But that will be absolutely dependent on how the national movement and the SNP as part of that approach the next general election. The only way that we can get back to the levels of support from the working people of this country that we had in 2015 is, I would suggest, on a Scotland United basis. Everybody's saying, look, it's about independence. Independence is the issue. That has to be pushed. That has to be pushed. Because that's what, then you have, but the problem the SNP have with taking that tack, though, is they would have to articulate the case. They would have to articulate the case. They'd have to have policies for an independent Scotland. And as far as I can work out, they're unable to do that right at the moment.
I mean, Eva, can you see, I mean, Lloyd's right. People are really, they're between a rock and a hard place. I tend to agree with Lloyd that it will be a very low turnout. I know if I was living in that constituency, I would be struggling to go out and vote. For a start, I think what happened to Margaret, we've articulated that on here. We find it disgusting, and anyone that wins that to me is winning a poisoned chalice of what they've done to probably the best member of Parliament that constituency has ever had. And I'm not doing that through rosy spectacles. She was damn hard worker, etc. But it's really indicative of our politics that the people in Scotland at the moment are so short of choice.
Well, if I lived in Rutherglen and Hamilton West, I don't know what I'd be doing, because I'd be looking at the SNP and Labour candidates, and I would barely be able to put a credit card or a cigarette paper between them. I'm not really seeing much of a difference between the two on the big issues. They're both the candidates are in favour of a gender recognition reform bill, notwithstanding the position of the Labour Party under Keir Starmer now. So if I was a woman going to be voting there, or a man who was gender critical, neither of those candidates would get my vote. I'd be looking at the ISP favourably in terms of their desire for Scottish independence and their opposition to the GRR bill, but I'd be concerned at their position in relation to abstentionism. So there are none of the other parties that particularly appeal to me, so I can well see why people would stay at home. But in Scotland in 2023, in any constituency, but particularly one which has a history of going from Labour to SNP and back again, there really should be a candidate with a burning passion and a courage and an ability to give people hope and to motivate them into believing that they're coming out to elect somebody who's going to be a local champion and a national champion too. And I'm not seeing that in any of the candidates thus far. And I think that that's indicative of politics, or elected politics at the moment, probably much further afield than simply the UK, by the way. But people are depressed in Scotland. We are fed up. We're sick of hearing the same old, and we're stuck in the constitutional debate, and we're going to remain stuck there until it's resolved. So the only thing that's going to take Scottish politics forward and increase, public involvement and increase civic excitement is when we've got a proper campaign on the Constitution. We've got a movement who are led by either one leader or a group of people who are not scared to take the establishment on and who are determined to allow the people to have a real, true voice. That's a constitutional convention. That's what should be happening. The more that Humza denies this, the more he proves that he's not even a continuity candidate, because the Constitutional Convention is something that his predecessor also promised way back at the beginning of 2020 on Brexit Day. So there is nothing worse than being, about to go to the polling booth and not knowing what you're going to do, why you're going to do it, because there are none of these people in that constituency just now offering what the people there need to see. And unfortunately, it's pretty much the same across the country. And we all have to get our acts together for the general election and decide our priorities. For everybody here, it's independence. And that we have to speak with one voice, because Scotland deserves nothing less. If we cannot get a Scotland United campaign together, we're stuck probably with a number of unionist MPs, and we're going to wait and see what powers are stripped away from the Scottish Parliament, and then we'll have a Holyrood election in 2026 and hope to goodness that we've got an independence majority then, because if we haven't, hell mend us, because, Phil alluded to it at the beginning, if we have not got an independence vote or an independence majority of MPs and votes for Westminster or the next time at Holyrood, we will have proven not too wee, not too poor, too bloody glad to do anything any better.
You're right. I just want to say to our viewers that this has been recorded on the Friday because we're busy for the next 2 days for all sorts of things, including Rutherglen, Hamilton West and the National Council meeting. So we've recorded this on the Friday. It's come to my notice, I've been told that if you remember when the leadership election was going on, Yvonne, Humza was going to be our first activist, and Kate Hogg was going to go to the Glasgow March, and she would be out camping. She lives in Skye. There's an All Under One Banner March this weekend in Skye, and on the Friday night, Kate has now just said that she won't be turning up. I can also assure you that the first activist in Humza, Yusuf, won't be turning up. Miraculously, they'll all be fit and ready and out there next week when it's the Believe in Scotland. But if they keep doing this, pushing away the rest of the Yes movement, because as I think it was Phil alluded to, or Lloyd earlier, Yvonne, it was when we were united as one Yes movement that we won 56 out of 59 seats, when we frightened the bejesus out of the British establishment. And this constantly pushing the rest of the Yes movement away doesn't do the cause of independence much good, does it?
No, not at all. In fact, Kate is beginning to resemble the parcel of rogues in her party. To pull the plug on All Under One Banner the night before is it's not worthy of her. Really, I'm very disappointed with her. Maybe there is a genuine reason, and I hope it's not illness or something really serious. But for her to do that the night before is really, it's a low blow, and
She had similar problems when it was to go and vote against the GRRB. It was on a maternity leave. She had similar excuses when it was the Glasgow March. But I don't believe in coincidences, particularly in politics. This is now the third coincidence.
She does have these weak-kneed moments, which is not what we want out of politicians. And Eva's talking about the women voters of Rutherglen, who are really, they have got very little choice at all. And there's no dynamic candidate that stands out. The Greens have put forward a choir boy. I don't even think his voice is broken yet. He's so young. no lived experience at all.
They
How
probably
on
win it.
earth can they represent that region when they're, still very wet behind the ears? It's insulting to the voters. They've got very little choice. And these are all factors, obviously, that Alipur will be considering over the next 24, 48 hours. But the people of Rutherglen are being shortchanged. And I think we'll see this because they'll just think, well, if they're giving up on us, we're giving up on them, and they'll stay at home and they won't turn out.
Yeah, I agree.
And it'll be yet another embarrassingly low vote, and whoever gets it won't really have the mandate of the people.
No, I agree, it's a mess, an absolute carnage. Time's running on, we're running out of time, and there are a few things. I'm glad to say that the Parliament will be resuming in a couple of weeks, and we get back to our 2 shows a week. Lloyd, you and I can, have our midweek meet. It'll be good fun, mate. We'll get back to good old topics. But there's certainly, this is something that we should be discussing. And one of the reasons we do the midweek shows, folks, is to say there's a big world out there, and we've got to stop just always focusing on what's happening here, because we're going into that big world one day. We need to know what's happening out there. And one of the things that's happened this week, 2 things, Phil, if we can cover in one question, is the BRICS Development Bank and the BRICS expansion. Now, the countries that have joined have expanded BRICS with Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, here we go, Ethiopia, Argentina, and Iran have all now joined BRICS. And if you look at that map there, folks, you'll see it's filling up. But it also constitutes, if I'm not mistaken, something like 60% now of the world's population, Phil. That's the first part. This is multipolarity, but I wanted to talk about the bank. The BRICS Bank also announced they're looking into a currency, a BRICS currency. But they're now lending money on projects, as we can see, using reals of Brazil, of the yuan of China, the ruble, and the rand. They're using local currencies and other currencies. De-dollarization, Phil, is on the way, and the hegemony of the West. And the EU and the UK and the US really need to find a way to work with BRICS.
Well, not at the moment. We're not. The first point. Oh, we do. Scotland does. If we want a future.
I think the whole Western world needs to. You have to set the realities. We are where we are now.
Yeah, but the people in charge don't want that. They're continuing to rape and pillage through usury, and that's just how it works. The growth we've talked about before, and if you notice, most of these countries that are joining or seeking to join have vast mineral resources. We're looking at BRICS controlling the majority of oil and gas going forward. That alone speaks volumes. The population, the size, the markets, the growing markets. BRICS is taking over. And that has been well documented, and the numbers that are joining this are staggering. And we should look forward. You're right, Europe should go in. The other thing is the investment they're making, the one you threw up. The Chinese, the Russians, and the key members of BRICS are investing in infrastructure projects in countries that allow the countries to make money, to actually pay the debt back and bring benefit to that country. Whereas what the West has been doing is pure usury. It's the banks raping and pillaging and stealing, because that's what banks do, like it or lump it. The big thing for me, massively, is the reverse of fiat currency. That is monster. That's earth-shattering, because the BRICS Development Bank now lending in South African rand, reals, yuan, rupees, So yes, this change is coming, and there will be a continued decline of the international power of the US dollar and every fiat currency for that matter, as a fundamental change of introducing what's called representative or commodity currencies that will blow the competition out of the water and lead the way forward monetarily. So the West is in economic decline, and the world is seeing it, and there's nothing we can do about it while the corrupt, greed-driven globalists are in control of Western governments. Reuters reported this, I found it quite interesting, August 15th. The development bank founded by BRICS in South Africa closed the auction for its first South African rand bonds, right? And it came under pressure to boost its local currency fundraising and lending. The new development bank's two bonds, R1 billion, $52 million, and a 5-year note and a 500 million rand 3-year note attracted 2.7 billion rand of bids in total. And this is in South Africa. Robert Kiyosaki, the author of Rich Dad Poor Dad, quotes the end of the US dollar is near, and he's citing the upcoming BRICS summit in South Africa as a trigger. Kiyosaki is projecting that the BRICS group, comprising, we know who's in there, will announce their new gold-backed digital currency during the summer of August 2022-24, and it will have dire consequences for the US dollar. Run for gold, as he's advising. Trillions of US dollars will rush home, inflation will go through the roof. For those who are perhaps not aware, fiat money is when the statement on the pound, for example, states that the government promised to pay the bearer in demand is backed up by something solid. It's actually backed up by a physical commodity like gold or silver. And fiat money, therefore, is government issued currency that is not backed by physical commodities such as gold or silver, but rather the government that issued it. And the value of that money is derived from the relationship between supply and demand and stability of the issuing government, rather than the worth of commodity. Now, we went away from this in Nixon 71 when he separated the US dollar from gold, and he suspended the most important component of the Bretton Woods system, which has been in effect since World War II. So what we're seeing now is the reintroduction of a non-fiat currency or commodity or representative currency that everyone will want, because you know it's good. It's good for what it says. We promised to play the bearer on demand. You can pretty much guarantee it because the gold is there. We've been playing a Ponzi scheme since 71, since currencies went fiat. So it's not the end. It's not going to be terrible, but it's a permanent state of decline unless we take control of our economy and our culture and start using monetary and fiscal economy or levers that benefit the people of Scotland, not those who would continue to use us and practice usury, the financial capitalists, who will see the decline and the almost permanent decline of the West, I'm afraid to say.
Well, can I just say that Lorna Slater agrees with you that we should do away with fiat currencies? Unfortunately, she thought it was people that buy Italian cars. That's the problem. There's one I would like all the rest of the theory to answer, which is quick before we go because the clock is clicking on, and that's Lloyd. The EU Digital Services Act came into being today. Now, this is an act that they're now going to hold the IT providers, or rather the IP providers, the internet providers, if they allow false narratives and false news and fake news to go on the internet, they will fine them. They can fine them up to 1/6 of their global turnover if they print false lies or false stories. Now, what worries me, Lloyd, and I don't know about you, is I have never in my life seen so many false narratives as we have about Ukraine. And people who are trying to bring the truth about Ukraine are finding themselves being deplatformed, cancelled, having their revenues grabbed because it doesn't appreciate. And this strikes me as the European Digital Services Act, is that if you don't play along with the liars and the globalists and the WEF people, they're just going to cripple you. So they will stop. Freedom of speech is under attack. It's a worry, is it not?
It's more than a worry, Roddy. I mean, what's so incredibly unpleasant about this is it gives you a hint that the European Union and NATO are much, much closer to each other than previously people have believed. You know, this is like warfare. This is like warfare on people and their free speech, and it's being done in a manner which I would not be in the least surprised that it was developed in that bit of Brussels where NATO headquarters is, rather than that bit of Brussels where the European Parliament is. It's deeply, deeply worrying, but at the same time, people have to recognise that you've got to fight back against this. You have to fight back. They can't take everybody to court. And also that, you know, I think it's really, really important what you said at the beginning. The false narrative over the Ukraine, which is unraveling on a more or less daily basis at the moment, has shown that it's not possible in this world of the World Wide Web. You cannot close down all information. You can attempt to limit it, but you'll never be able to close it all down. And now with the introduction of AI, we're looking at a whole different set of worrying and deeply worrying concerns. But this hammer to crack a nut nonsense coming out of Europe, really, it's not clever. It's just not clever.
Eva, the fact is that, you know, the deplatform, we've seen it. I mean, we've seen numerous things on GRR, people who are making comments, adult human females should have safe spaces, are getting deplatformed, are getting called bigots. We've seen it with Patrick Harvey this week. This is the kind of thing that they will actually then start, it's saying we can fight back is one, quite right, Lloyd, but the fact is they're going after the internet providers, and it's them, they're going to take their money, and so they will fall into line, and we will suddenly have to just fall into line as well. And people like me who are opposed to all wars will either be deplatformed and it's refused access to internet if we don't agree with the Western hegemony and the narrative of the governments. It really is terrible.
Right, frightening actually, but you touched there, obviously, Roddy, upon the issues surrounding Patrick Harvey. There's something very sinister going on in Scotland, as we've said so many times already. It's reported that somebody called him a name, they allegedly called him a deviant, and apparently the police are investigating this now. Now, quite honestly, I have no issue whatsoever with the police investigating that. If he was offended and he thinks that that's an offence aggravated by a hate element, although the hate crime bill is not yet in law, it's not been enforced yet, I think because the police don't know where to start. Leave that to one side. He was offended. He thinks it's criminal conduct. The police are, at liberty to investigate that if they wish. But it really makes me wonder why there were so many other incidences which are similar or far worse that were not investigated, and where other politicians didn't stick up for the people who had been bad-mouthed. The obvious examples that spring to mind are that Humsley is sticking up today, or yesterday rather, for Patrick Harvey. I haven't yet found him sticking up in the past for Joanna Cherry, Joan McAlpine, or very many others. I've been at women's events, I've observed women's events where women have been called all sorts of names and screamed and shouted and sworn at, and many of the people who did that were subsequently applauded by elected politicians in Holyrood. You know exactly who I'm talking about. We've also still got the pantomime, the awful experience of Julie Marshall in the Duthie Park in Aberdeen, when the man who assaulted her, who was witnessed, the evidence was corroborated, got off with a warning after an investigation which was at best cursory. You will see that we're going to have several days investigating whether a bad name was shouted at an elected politician, and that seems to attract far more police attention than the assault of a woman in a public place. These are the actions or the omissions of Police Scotland. They are accountable to the public, but their behaviour at the moment baffles me and very many others.
Yvonne, the last word's going to be with you, but I'm always feel as if I'm about to be doing the equivalent of shooting Bambi. I'm going to have to disagree with your pal Eva. I don't think being called a deviant and then bringing in the police, I think, is ridiculous. I mean, it really is. I mean, some of the abuse we all take. I've been called a damn sight worse than a deviant by people on my own side for daring to disagree with people who are in other organisations because I just disagree with it, or because I disagree with war. I've been called a damn sight worse than a deviant. I've been called one person called me a communist Nazi. I've been all sorts of things. The last thing in my mind was to call in the police. He's a politician. For God's sake, grow a spine, man. Stop being a big Jesse. Someone called you a deviant. Get with the programme. But this cancelling and running at the police and complaining about bloody ribbons on a lamppost, or someone called you a bad name, it's just so. Have we really dropped to that level, everyone?
Well, I looked up the definition of deviant, and it means departing from usual or accepted standards. Okay. And of course, he was a government minister in the government that has been investigated by the police for sending infected COVID people into old people's homes. You know, and a lot of folks' grandparents died because of that decision. So for him to, or whoever it was who called the police, you know, just get a grip. I'm sick of these snowflakes. That's all you can call them, you know. And I'm surprised at Eva, but I'm not going to fall out with her. She's too scary when she gets angry. But really, you know, deviant, departing from usual or accepted standards. Patrick Harvey hates women. That is a deviant behaviour. There, I've said it. So if Police Scotland want to come and get me, do it after Coronation Street.
If you want to come and get me, you better book a flight. There's only 2 flights a week here, but here, because I'm going to say as well.
Probably want to come and get you, Roddy, because you're in Spain.
Yeah, the thing is, deviant behaviour, as you say, it goes against normal accepted practice. Well, it is normal practice to deny adult human males access to adult human females, toilets, changing rooms, sports and prisons. So that does make you a deviant.
No, I think of a lot more words to describe them, but...
It's before the watershed. Anyway, I'm with you. Folks, the time's been this. I mean, I can't believe how much overrun. It's getting, I mean, it really is getting ridiculous. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this as much as me, and the time flies in when you're having fun, as they say. And we will be back soon to 2 shows a week, and maybe we can get back to 1 hour at a time. But can I thank you all for being here, giving up your valuable time, and to you for watching and sharing, and we appreciate all the support you're giving us. We haven't had many suggestions from you recently, apart from one I got recently, which is, let me just tell you, anatomically impossible. But some suggestions of questions you would like answered or covered, do get in touch. But until we see you again, please take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.